Welcome to the Corporate Learning Network's Roundtable on MOOCs. I'm Jeff Cattell. Massive open online courses have made quite the stir in the higher education market and even some corporate circles. The New York Times declared 2012 as the year of the MOOC. A year later, we want to survey the landscape. We're just coming off a summer where it seemed like you couldn't go a week without seeing MOOCs in the headlines. First, it was news that edtech company and MOOC platform Coursera raised $43 million in venture capital funding. Then, Blackboard announced it was jumping on the MOOC bandwagon by offering a dedicated purpose-built platform. And finally, the news that San Jose State University would pause its partnership with Udacity, another MOOC platform operator, after poor student performance. But even that has been in the news recently, as of last week, when results from the summer MOOC courses there were released and showed marked improvements. So we've assembled an expert panel to talk through all of these moving parts in the world of MOOCs. And before we get started, today's roundtable is brought to you by our upcoming conference, Effective Marketing for Online Education, which will be held December 9th through the 12th in San Diego, California. So first I have Kevin Currie, who's the Executive Director of Northeastern University Online, the university's distance learning division, which includes more than 60 undergraduate and graduate programs and degrees. Kevin has also held the positions as Senior Associate Dean of the College of Professional Studies at Northeastern and the Director of the Corporate Training Group at Boston University. Hi, Kevin.
Hi, Jeff. Thanks for inviting me in on this rather interesting discussion topic.
Yeah, we're excited to have you here. Next up is Professor Curtis Bonk, a professor of education at Indiana University with a focus on instructional systems technology, emerging educational technologies, and the promotion of a more learner-centered approach to instruction. Curtis taught the MOOC Instructional Ideas and Technology Tools for Online Success on Blackboard's course sites last year. The course provided theoretical concepts and practical tools for instructors to improve motivation, retention, and engagement within blended and online courses. Welcome, Kurt.
Hey, Jeff, it's great to be here, and those interested in that MOOC, it's still up, and anyone can still jump in and take that. It's free. All the stuff Blackboard has left up, all 50-some-odd MOOCs that they've done.
Awesome, that's great to hear. And finally, we have Craig Weiss, who is an e-learning analyst and founder of eLearning 24/7. He also writes the eLearning 24/7 blog, which covers many topics including learning management systems, learning trends, and MOOCs. Craig, welcome.
Thank you for having me, and I'm looking forward to having a nice, lively discussion.
Great, great, wonderful. So as I mentioned at the top, I want to see if we can just start with sort of a diagnosis of what's happening here. So last year, I think, could potentially be described as some sort of MOOC madness. So with all of you being on the ground, how do you see things playing out this year? What does the landscape look like now? And since, Kurt, you started last year with offering the MOOC through Blackboard, and now it's still available, as you mentioned, I figured it would be great to start with you.
Okay, you know, when you look at the landscape of 2 years really of robust experience with MOOCs, you see that, you know, Stanford really sprung out all the attention with the 100,000 people MOOCs, 3 in a row or so. In the past couple of months, we see both the yin and the yang happening. We see Harvard, American University, San Jose State cautioning, questioning, debating, and discussing the legitimacy of a MOOC or whether they should jump in or not. You see state governments trying to pass laws, endorsing them, sanctioning them, offering funding for them. 2012, according to the New York Times article out in November, was the year of the MOOC. But if you go and listen to people like George Siemens, who taught the first MOOC, and listen to him, he's saying 2013 is the year of the anti-MOOC. So we're getting things coming at us in both directions. A lot of hesitancy today in the air playing out. At the same time, I'm seeing more acceptance of the possibility of MOOCs for credit, of the possibility of MOOCs for credentialing, of the possibility of MOOCs as a lost leader to dip your toes in the water and take one odd class as a free course and then jump into a full-on master's degree after that. Of course, there's a lot of questions about business plans, a lot of questions about how to teach a MOOC, a lot of questions about the types of MOOCs that are viable. I will say the professional development MOOCs are, and MOOCs which fit a niche such as new laws in taxation, public health. Yesterday there was a zombie MOOC announced or something like that out of UC Irvine, and Canvas have partnered together to offer a zombie MOOC, basically a public health MOOC. I think they call it something like the Walking Dead MOOC or something like that. I'll stop there, and I'll jump back in after Kevin and Craig have a chance to add to or augment that what I've said.
Well, I definitely agree that the anti-MOOC movement, and I admit I'm one of those folks that's in that play. I think the MOOCs have a lot of possibilities, but because it follows what I believe is what's called a synchronous-based approach, it's almost basically taking instructor-led training and sticking it online with a syllabus and whatnot, which would explain why you see completion ratios of less than 7%. And, it is possible. I'm a big believer that they need to offer credits. The problem is how is that going to work? Because the advantages of MOOC is that you can be anywhere to take that, and you don't have to be involved at that university. And the majority of people, my understanding with MOOCs, are adult learners. So there has to be an incentive to that, and there has been talk of, I know of a couple of universities that are looking at charging for MOOCs, but if I'm going to do that, there has to be a way that an applicant can be waived of that fee to take the MOOC. And so there's a lot of great ideas, but I feel they haven't really been fleshed out. It's sort of, hey, here's a great idea, and then we'll figure it out along the way. And there has to be a lot of questions because people are getting this benefit for free, which I believe is a partial issue on why you're seeing low completion rates, because they eventually just get bored. And it will be interesting to see what happens in 2014 if they decide to offer credits. How is that going to work, and how is that especially going to work for an international audience?
Great. How about you, Kevin? What is your perspective on things right now with MOOCs?
Well, I think that I'm not quite of the anti-MOOC ilk where they go back to the original Webster's definition of MOOC that's a slang word referring to a foolish, insignificant, or contemptible person, although some of my compatriots do feel that's what MOOCs are. I think that the MOOC movement is a little bit like the .com era, where people put way too much on it for what it was going to do. It was going to revolutionize education and so on. I think that this year what you're looking at is as both Craig and Curtis mentioned, the possibilities of MOOCs. I mean, there are possibilities with MOOCs. I see in the, for those of us who have been around a while, I remember when CDs were going to be replacing all of the classroom-based education within companies, and the big problem that they had, which is the big problem that you have with MOOCs, are completion rates. So what, how can that replace higher education? I think that there are an awful lot of opportunities with MOOCs. It kind of reminds me of the folks who could take the book and read the book on C++ and C#, and they could get it on their own. Well, I think most of the people probably completing MOOCs are those folks. They're already in the field, and they're getting the next, latest, and the greatest thing. I think the other advantage of a MOOC is if an organization happens to have a real expert in an area or a rock star presenter, they can put the MOOC out there for marketing and brand purposes for their organization. One of the concerns that I always have about things like MOOCs is, and it's been mentioned earlier, what is the business model? I mean, it's like everybody says it's free education. Well, that's like 800 numbers are free to the user, but somebody's paying for it. So how is it that they're going to be able to support, once all this influx of cash has been spent, how are you going to be able to support that model? Are you going to be selling off the information the way Google does with Gmail? accounts so that they can sell it to marketers and say these are the folks who will want this textbook or want this this particular subject area. So I think that, again, I think that there are a lot of possibilities with MOOCs, but frankly we're taking a little bit of a wait and see attitude, because it does appear to be a bright shiny object to an awful lot of folks.
Can I add in and just comment a bit about what Craig had to say? And that is the concern about electronic page turning and giving people degrees for clicking, or basically remote accessing content that you could get anywhere. Some people's lives are changed by that. Believe it or not, my life changed by that. I took TV and correspondence courses that I shouldn't say were awful, but were not as engaging as a face-to-face class would have been, and it helped me escape the cube farms of Milwaukee as a board accountant and CPA and get into a new life. And so while most people that take traditional higher education in the U.S. will probably not benefit to the full degree that I did by TV and correspondence by taking MOOCs today, there are people around the world that will. And so we can't discount that that side of things. I do think we need to move away from clicking. And so I'm working on a book right now. In fact, tonight I'm finishing a draft, sending it to the copy editor on motivation and retention online, and I'm studying the percent of completion and all that. I'm going to make this book free to the world as a way to help build interactivity, engagement, goal setting, all the motivational principles we've known about for decades that we can embed in most courses that are blended or fully online today. We just haven't done it yet. I think we're heading in that direction, though, and I think Craig's point is well taken. But we can do better, and we will do better.
Well, just a quick piece. What I see is you're really talking about two different things here. First of all, I taught a class at a university back in 1998 that was on Blackboard that used a synchronous-based platform. I mean, when I was working on a PhD, it was going through Lotus Notes. It was a full online. My professor was in Australia. I mean, it was a great idea. But the success of learning today is asynchronous-based, where everything is self-contained. It can be very interactive. The problem is partially the rapid content authoring tool market, which has enabled people to build very quickly, where it used to take like 6 months to really build an asynchronous-based course. And secondly is in the education space, there is still, there's a dichotomy here. The education space, academia, 95% use a synchronous-based learning approach with a synchronous-based platform like Blackboard, for example. In the corporate, over 95% use asynchronous-based, which is self-contained. Everything is in there, the variables, nothing like you're talking about the interactivity and engagement. So there is a difference between the two that's coming forward, and research and data shows that the asynchronous-based is extremely successful over synchronous-based, and the other thing is data shows that online learning is extremely successful. I remember I read some report just quickly here about a survey they did with college presidents at not only 4-year colleges, 2-year colleges, technical, and they stated that online learning was as equal, if not better, than classroom-based. So I think there's a lot of possibilities for that, but the MOOCs today, if you look at the MOOCs, I've yet to see one that is asynchronous-based. They're all synchronous-based, and you're correct. You have to have an expert and everything else in there, but it's like classroom-based teaching. I know plenty of people that were experts but were horrible teachers. And it's the same thing that applies online. Just because you're a rock star doesn't make you a rock star when it comes to MOOCs. And that's where I think there is a real challenge, because you're right. There are great MOOCs out there, but there's a lot of crummy ones out there, and how we're going to differentiate the two is going to be big, especially in the corporate market. Thank you.
The corporate world in the late 90s could afford synchrony. Well, it's funny, when I tracked this, I did national surveys of corporate and higher ed, and I studied, my whole 1990s was spent on async, and in the 2000s I started studying sync, so I'm researching. In the 90s, higher ed could only afford async. We couldn't afford synchronous at the time. Corporates could, so corporates offered an option. and corporates would typically say that e-learning was asynchronous self-paced or webinars that were synchronous with an instructor. And higher ed would say that e-learning was asynchronous only. We couldn't afford this stuff. Increasingly in higher ed, we're adapting synchronous. This Google Hangouts is something I used in my spring class that dramatically improved the evaluations of the course. We used this as an option after class in Adobe Connect, but we archived them all. And in my MOOC, we did a synchronous weekly session, but we archived the things in Illuminate, so people who couldn't come, who are located in China or wherever, could watch them later, and people are still watching them now. It's a difficult thing to play out, sync or async, and which one's better. We're still I think we're still experimenting with that and still trying to figure out which is better. Again, my research was showing in the 90s it was all async, and I was committed to async. Now I'm increasingly, personally, I'm moving more in a synchronous fashion, or both and, but I think the jury's still out. I don't know.
Well, we actually were doing synchronous distance learning since 1972, and it was in the satellite microwave mode. It was basically what I call voyeuristic learning, because what you were doing is you had people doing, in a lot of graduate engineering courses are still being done this way, is what you're doing is you're in a live campus-based class. And when initially we started with microwave, basically we had companies that had small rooms with television sets that we wired in a microwave dish, and then we would put a telephone in the room, so if they had a question, they would call into a TA who was in the classroom, who would then get the question to the faculty member. So that was kind of, early on synchronous. We then migrated up to satellite synchronous, and NTU was a player in that. They were based in Colorado, and what they did was they aggregated colleges and universities, so they'd take 2 or 3 courses from Northeastern, some from BU, some from MIT, some from Stanford. The challenge with synchronous is time zone. If you are running something in a synchronous fashion, then you really are restricting the audience to people who can respond within that time zone. We started doing asynchronous in 1998, and basically what we do is we actually work with the faculty to make sure that there, if at all possible, there is a synchronous component to it, but that the synchronous component is set up for groups. And those groups are divided up based upon time zones, because you do have that issue. You really can't conduct worldwide training with a fully synchronous model within a common class unless you're only offering that class by time zone.
All right, well, thanks, guys. That's a really great discussion, I think, and a great start of sort of where we are. And I think what is very clear is that this discussion, especially the discussion around asynchronous versus synchronous learning, there are, I think, really advantages to both, but that there's still both being tried again and again, and there really isn't, as you were saying, the jury's still out, Kurt. One thing that I want to move into a little bit, focusing specifically on MOOCs, one thing that I think, at least in my research, haven't heard much about is the potential impacts of big data and predictive analytics in terms of MOOCs. So I know that's a big buzzword now, and people just throw it around kind of haphazardly, but if you have these people entering into a course, say like Kurt's MOOC on Blackboard, you theoretically, have their names and information about them, what other classes they've taken. So are schools using that information right now? And then if they aren't, or what are the possibilities for the future? And do you see that as potentially changing the way we approach education when you have all this additional information about the learners that you're trying to reach? And I guess, Kevin, I figure we could start with you since you're from a more of an administrative perspective in the online education world.
Yeah, I think in particular when you're looking at a MOOC versus generally online, if you're looking at generally online, you might identify the individuals and decide what you're going to do with the individuals. But with the MOOCs, this summer I had a chance to have some conversations with Andrew Ho over at he's the research director for Harvard X, and some of the information that they're getting is very, very interesting. It's behavior information. It's like, how long do the people spend reading who are successful within the course, because they can see them within the how much time they spend on something. And it's not necessarily just, you know, clicking through. They're able to, as they're refining things, get better and better data out of it. One of the things that he did say that was kind of refreshing was, hey guys, this is a big experiment. You know, this is not the end-all, be-all. We don't know where it's going to go. You know, it seems like everybody else is saying, oh, Harvard and MIT, they're going to solve the problems of the world with this. And the folks at Harvard and MIT, except for Anwar when he was on the Colbert Report, is saying that, no, this is a big experiment, and we're finding out how people learn with this. So from that perspective, it is important to get that data. And the reason it's important to get that data is so that you can have conversations with students when they start and say, look, if you spend more time on the course doing this, you will be more successful within the course. So you're helping the student by setting them up and giving them the information that's necessary in order to be successful. That's where I see the big advantage of the data, is what makes students successful within courses.
You know, I see the challenges with big, you know, the terminology of big data is, first and foremost, it's really the benefit of human resources and talent management. But going into, say, the education setting, it's going to tie into how much information the student is willing to give the university or the school. Definitely for a MOOC, it's going to be really challenging. And then for courses itself, I mean, that's where it kind of relies into for you. Let's say you're a university and you want to find out, based on your online content or on your MOOC, who are your real learners that are targeting this space, and you know, where are they located? Are they located, say, specifically in Atlanta, Georgia, and you find that they take 6 of these consecutive courses that are all tied to this subject, and based on this data, you're saying that their predictive analysis is that they're you know, juniors are returning back to the university and they have 2-year degree. I mean, so you can get really extensive analytics, but part of it, you know, is tied back to how much the student is going to give you, and then you have to deal with privacy concerns. I mean, at a private university it's different, but at a public university you have to deal with all these privacy concerns. If you're in Europe, you have to deal with the Safe Harbor Act, which a lot of people are not aware of. And so there are all these kind of variables going into it. And one other thing, you know, you mentioned about the MOOCs and getting the analytics, or what I think is a real possibility, going back to, you know, dealing with the MOOCs, is utilizing a video learning platform where you can get extensive analytics and can find out and kind of click around the video. It's actually something very unique where I think it has enormous power, these video learning platforms and the videos themselves, over traditional MOOCs, where you could have way beyond analytics to really benefit you know, the students at the end of the day. I mean, the goal of MOOCs at the end of the day, if you strip everything out of there, is it going to benefit the learner, and how is it going to benefit them short and long term? And that, I think, is a big question, regardless of you know, extracting that big data, which would essentially identify those things for you.
I'm typing in the chat window, and I'm not too successful in typing while I'm trying to talk here, but there's a George Siemens, who taught the first MOOC, has also spearheaded the first learning analytics kind of organization, if you will, and they've had an annual summer institute, typically in Canada, where he's from. But this one was at Stanford back in June, apparently. You know, I'm going to agree with what Kevin started with there, is that our focus is pretty much on the behavioral side. You know, if we can figure out where students are misguided, I think that's what the Khan Academy is doing, is looking at problems that 1,000 people are getting wrong and then redoing the instruction based on it. I could see visualization components being added to this, so that when we walk in our offices, you might have some kind of holographic image indicating the kinds of questions that students are getting wrong and who those students are even. You might even have their pictures come up with that image so you can personalize it to some degree and pop and click a virtual space of some kind and have an email go sent off to the student to say, go explore this additional resource, and it might ameliorate the problem in some ways. So I think that that looking at specific questions people are getting wrong are really what people are going to be looking at, and the time, as Craig was saying, maybe time devoted to different pieces of the class. So you know, that kind of data was apparent in early course management systems that I looked at Simon Fraser back in the late 90s. People were looking by course, statistics course, psych course, or whatever, where students were spending their time, where they were getting questions wrong, and so forth. We're just coming back to it today because with MOOCs, you can see the data visualized in a apparent way because of the thousands of people potentially taking the course. Before I end there, let me just point out that I made a slight error in my previous statement about synchronous. Maybe not error, but it's misguided, misleading maybe, in that in higher ed in the 90s when I said we weren't doing synchronous, I meant web-based synchronous. We were doing video conferencing very, very well, and I think Kevin pointed that out. And I was doing video conferencing, combining picture tell and see you, see me, and things of that nature, and was being told, don't combine picture tell and see you, see me, you'll bring down the internet. You've got 20 students in your class, and now we've got hundreds of thousands taking a class, downloading synchronous content, and nobody blinks an eye. It's just what people were getting nervous about in the 90s, people are yawning about today, really. It's front page news. My mom's reading about this. My brother's reading about this. This is all front page news. It was not that way in the 90s. So that's the difference, I think. Everyone's talking about this, and it's forcing us to try and make sense of what's possible.
And I would agree with Curtis. Also, during the 90s, the leaders in this area seemed to be private industry versus higher education. I mean, private industry was doing, you know, picture tell because, well, frankly, because they could actually afford that T1 pipeline that was necessary, but they were doing a lot of creative things. The other thing I'd like to point out is that the MIT side of this, going back to Curtis's talking about encouraging students as they're doing things, I worked with some folks from MIT in the 90s over adaptive learning. And the challenge with it back then was they had to, the system had to learn the student, and it would take probably 3 or 4 courses before they actually learned the student. But now they're developing things at a much faster rate so that they can actually, would it be better if I presented this verbally or visually or written? You know, which one works best for you? So the adaptive learning part, I think, is getting very important. That being said, I still believe that the most successful way for people to learn is to get a good foundation. So whatever it is, they've got to start at the foundation. And if that foundation where they build idea upon idea upon idea isn't there, it doesn't matter how much adaptive learning you put in there. You still need to build on something in a logical sequence.
I just want to, I'm sorry, Jeff, I just want to put, you know, in respect to my colleagues here on the call, is that, again, in 1998, I was developing, for University of Nebraska at Kearney, a synchronous-based course, which meant a synchronous-based platform, which meant Blackboard. And actually, in 1993, the first accredited 100% online university was Jones International. So when you're talking education, that was back in 1993. A lot of people think University of Phoenix. That is erroneous. And you know, really the corporate side slowly started taking off in 1998 or late 90s. The problem is yeah, people had T1, but you're remembering that according to data, the majority of people who access a learning management system, which is where these courses are going to be placed, excluding the people that are hourly, access out of the workplace. And so if you're running a 56K modem, maybe you were hitting at a 38.8. I mean, I lived in Boston. That's kind of what I was hitting at. And so obviously certain of the content. But the courses where you're talking about adaptive learning, if the instructional designer, e-learning developer was using Authorware or Macromedia Director, they tended to use both, you could have adaptive learning. The problem is you had a very small segment. I mean, you had to know programming skills. I mean, you had to be technically extensive, knowledgeable. to build that, and it just wasn't the case in education. Where today, the old joke is, and this really you can tie it right back into the MOOCs. Is again, when I taught at university, we had IT available. We had somebody who was in the lab, a special lab that could help faculty and build these courses. On the business side, I can't pick up the telephone and tell my IT director to come on over, and they race over there to take care of it. And I think that's part of the challenge, is the advantage today in higher education, which I don't think is being fully utilized, is the power of technology in there, and it's in the way that the courses are built. Because the capabilities at the education level, education has done a lot of amazing things, but the capabilities are much more robust because you have IT in-house, and they're more readily available to you than it is, say, on the business side. And it gets back to the MOOCs. And when you're talking about the power of MOOCs, is that people have enormous capabilities. Most people in education are not using a rapid content authoring tool, where you see that heavily used on the corporate side. And I hope that that's one of the power capabilities we get out of the MOOCs, is where they can effectively build content, whether it's adaptive learning or branching or whatever you might call it, so that it goes beyond what we really are today, which is, and no offense to anybody, a point and click, and you have to follow a syllabus. Again, I don't consider that online learning that I have to follow a syllabus. I might as well just be in the classroom and looking at a video like we did with distance learning.
All right. Well, in sort of transitioning our discussion into corporations, I think that's a good, an interesting place where there is this sort of possibility. There's a lot of things happening right now in the corporate space, as you alluded to, Craig. One of the things specifically with that is that there's this news that corporations are sort of honing in potentially on this idea of using something like a MOOC platform in their corporate learning suites. So I know a few weeks ago, Jeannie Meister wrote for Forbes.com this article that looked at the potential implications of the use of MOOCs in the workplace in terms of corporate learning and training. Her discussion mostly focused on McAfee and their use of more of the flipped classroom model, which we can certainly get into what that means. It obviously offers some sort of style of MOOC, where you're doing things in a massive way, sort of on your own, and then there was sort of the idea that you come back to this classroom setting or sort of virtual classroom setting and have this discussion. So I know, Craig, you mentioned that you've worked with some of these corporations. You obviously do a lot of work in the corporate world. So what have you seen on the ground in terms of the use and implications of MOOCs or MOOC-like platforms, and is that something that will be expanding in the next few years, you think?
I've talked to a lot of people and learning development directors, training directors on numerous verticals, including globally, with MOOCs. And while there are people that are definitely excited about it, one of the big concerns is who's going to access the MOOC. If it's going to be, when you look at MIT or Harvard or whomever, Joe Widget University, the capability is that anybody can access that. And on the corporate side, they tend to, actually they don't tend to, they do want it only for their employees or their customers. And so if the MOOC is available to their customers and their employees and it's somehow developed, then it's a benefit. And it has to be, we talk about synchronous or whatever, it has to be asynchronous based, because that's where they find the most effective, and you can have assessment, you can have all that stuff that everyone's talking about. The problem is, again, twofold. They're not really hip on opening this up to everybody, and the reason I say that is because in the early and mid-2000s, and you still see it a little bit today, there were what we call course marketplaces in the learning management space, where you would create a course, say, on sales. It was non-proprietary. You could put it on there, and anybody could come and buy the course as long as they're tied to that LMS. And it was a big failure, not because of the content. I mean, everybody was kind of doing that. It was a failure because the people creating it were leery about people sharing it and using it at their other companies. I mean, Open Sesame is a great example. It has all these courses created by boutiques, and anybody can use the content. But that's the fact, is it's built by third-party content providers. And so when you get back to the MOOCs in the corporate space, it sounds amazing. But again, we have to go back to the privacy issues in Europe are a lot different than it is in the United States. And you have to be involved and be concerned on that. Corporate, I remember somebody telling me, and it's sort of tied into the MOOCs, saying to me, well, this is going to be great because, if you work at a technology company, they're going to be more open to it, blah, blah, blah. I worked at a tech company in the .com days, and I can tell you, when they laid off people, by the time they got back, there was a security person there, and you had to walk out the door. And these were very cutting edge. This was a very cutting edge company. So, there was ones that don't even let you take paper clips. And so the assumption that you're going to be able to go and, go and select into the various MOOCs has a lot of people concerned, especially the people that are the decision makers, the training directors, the learning and development. I would say one other thing is this new kind of buzzword in the industry called a learning record store, or LRS. And I think it has a nice correlation to the MOOCs. It's a great idea, and people rave about it and think this is phenomenal, but then they find out that, and the premise for people who aren't aware is that your employee, let's take it from the business side, your employee goes to one LMS and they have a learning record store, and that employee leaves your company. They can take your data file, their data record, their learning record, and then they can go to another LMS and implement it. The problem is, we get back to the corporate concerns of privacy, and do I really want them sharing, even the courses were relevant or not, with somebody who could be my competitor. The other problem is that LMS going to have a learning record, and if an LRS, and if not, where's the data going to be hosted? And I say that's a tie-in nice with the MOOCs because they got to be hosted somewhere, which is a learning management system. Nobody's going to stick a MOOC in the corporate level just on a web server. It's not going to happen. And then how is that going to operate? It gets back to the business plan and to achieving that. And the corporate people that I've talked to are extremely leery, and that includes even CEOs at various learning management systems, big and small, that I know some that take MOOCs, but they don't want to have it as part of their corporate identity.
Okay. I know that the two of you, Kurt and Kevin, I know you're more in the academic world. Do you have any perspective on this?
Well, I don't see, unless it's a marketing tool, I don't see how MOOCs, that is massively open online courses, to Craig's point, are really attractive to corporations. They are extremely proprietary about what they're doing. It's if, in fact, somebody wants to learn how to install a machine or do something, well, they want them to be a customer. And so they'll give them access somehow, which is the antithesis of what a MOOC is, being, so open. So I really don't see where I see where online learning is advantageous to them, but I really don't see where the MOOC in its purest form, maybe a SMOOC, but not a MOOC.
Last week, the company, NovoEd, announced 18 courses in entrepreneurship, and I could see many companies or individuals who want to start up a company and whatnot, taking advantage of those MOOCs, whether they be on entrepreneurship, there were leadership courses, there's creativity courses, and so forth. So, as Craig's saying, corporations may not offer the MOOCs, but they're sure as heck going to be taking advantage of them, and they might be MOOCs on safety, occupational safety and hazard risks. This one on The Walking Dead's on public health. That I mentioned. In the UK, they're offering courses on taxation to the general public. And you see Warren Buffett's sister heading up MOOCs on philanthropy, I believe it is. So there'll be a number of, and as he was saying, the marketing, new products we were tracking Adobe, well, it was Macromedia back in the day, and the community of practice around Macromedia was amazing. And part of the reason Adobe bought them out was for that community of practice, which were the zealots out there getting out the word about new products. And so I could see MOOCs on new product announcements and training people how to use product. So as Craig said, customers, but also I'm reading in Chief Learning Officer and other places that it's not just customers but vendors themselves who offer products to a company. You might be training as well about what you offer to making your vendors more aware of your needs. So customers and vendors both. And I'm also, when I was at Maisie's conference last year, Elliot Maisie's Learning Conference, we talked about MOOCs, and hackathons was a popular topic then, teaching programming skills to people in these hackathons. So, you know, getting just-in-time skill-based training for folks, competency-based training, marketing of products, entrepreneurship, leadership, special topics of interest, those will all be viable things. But for a company to create a course for their sales training and then make it available for competitors, that's probably not going to happen. Last week when I was at Fort Still, Oklahoma, training Army personnel, their concern was in part this, but more a security issue. You know, they had some kind of phrase about the internet Nazis that they have to deal with. Is this being broadcast? I should probably blank that one out. But they're dealing with some significant issues of accessing the internet because of security issues. So it's not just corporations that are dealing with some of these issues. People in government settings, people in military settings, and even us in higher ed might have similar questions.
All right. Well, thanks, guys. That was some great conversation on the corporate stuff and some really interesting potential implications going forward, especially as you mentioned with security and with the competitive nature of the corporate world. So I know I've taken up a lot of your time today, but I know and a lot of our discussion is really focused on the current moment and even historically, which is really wonderful to see how things have evolved over the last 2 to 3 decades. But I want to end on a note trying to look towards sort of the future. I know it's very hard to forecast, very hard to predict. You know, 5 or 10 years ago, we may not have even thought of this as a technological possibility, the idea of a MOOC. So, but the question I want to pose to all of you is, what impact should MOOCs have? That could be, you know, globally speaking. That could be in an education framework. That could be in a corporate framework. However you choose to answer that. But what should the impact of these types of platforms be?
Well, I'll go first. I think it has. I think it's going to come down to the way the content is developed. I mean, virtual reality, I think, opens up a lot of possibilities. Augmented reality, Connect technology really can do amazing things. It's being used actually in education today, and it opens up, I think, a lot of doors with you know, MOOCs, especially in the education, and when I say education, K-12 and higher education as well. I think the future is going to come down to, at the end of the day, and I hate to say this because, you know, education, again, I taught at a university. I used to be a high school teacher, and you know, nobody ever likes to say the nasty word of revenue, surviving by making money. And you know, the reason you see a lot of students going online is because tuition is so high. And the reason that universities, and when I say universities, colleges and whatnot, are cutting back programs or making the instructors, you know, part-time from a benefits is because of money. And I think you're going to see MOOCs, and you're starting to see a couple test it, where they're going to have to charge to make money. And it, you know, at the end of the day, you know, it goes back to what we call, you know, during the dot-com days, and you're seeing it sort of happen again. Everybody comes up with these amazing ideas. You got a lot of VC capital, angel investors, private equity firms putting money into this, but they have an expectation that there's going to be money coming out of here. And at the university level, I think the MOOCs are going to have a couple of things. One, they're going to have to offer credits. They're not going to be able, I mean, they'll be able to survive without them, but I think for long term, they're going to have to be able to offer credits. They're going to have to be able to make the credits transferable, so that if I take credits through a Duke MOOC, I can transfer it. Maybe I'm going to Stanford or whatnot. They have to have some type of certificates as a value add if I'm in the corporate side. Let's say I want to take an entrepreneurship course as a MOOC. Where's the benefit? Adult learners want to know what's in it for me, and if there's a benefit to that. And on the business side, okay, I get this certificate. A lot of people think this is going to get me more money. So, you know, it almost kind of plays into this thing. And at the end of the day, they're going to want to charge more money. And, you know, it's funny, I just read this thing today talking about how people with smartphones are being turned off with the GPS. They don't like the location-based anymore. They don't like ads anymore. And I often wonder, I've seen LMS's test putting ads in the LMS and making it a freemium, and it's just totally bombed out. And I wonder if MOOCs will eventually include ads as sort of a way to offset the cost, because creating that isn't free, despite what somebody might think. You know, an instructor, a professor is not doing it. They're on a salary. And I will state from a professional, personal experience, it's not easy to create an online course at the university level. And, you know, at the end of the day, I'm money, and there has to be a way to offset that. And that's how I see where the market is going to go when we talk 10 years down the road, in order for MOOCs to survive beyond this sort of initial wow phase.
Okay, I'll go next then, if you want. And I'll do it quickly so that hopefully that Curtis has some time left here. The benefits that I see from the MOOCs, if everything goes accordingly, it will be the application of the technology and the learning data for course development at institutions of higher learning or corporate or whoever else creates online courses. In fact, campus-based courses as well, because learning's kind of learning. Number two would be, I see the advantage of MOOCs at the opposite ends of the spectrum. I see that people who are the experts in an area who need to get something, you know, like the one that was done on artificial intelligence. I mean, you had to know something about artificial intelligence and you want to move to the next level. I think it's advantageous there. And the other end is on the foundation level. If folks can get certain foundation things covered, in fact, we're looking at working with some of our faculty that some of the MOOC, the aspects of the MOOC would be homework assignments pre and post to get people up to a certain level, like basic math skills. And then the third thing is, I agree with Craig. I really think that, in particular, in access colleges within universities and colleges, the credit-bearing aspect of this, either through a portfolio assessment or through testing. I mean, I see places like Excelsior College and others awarding credit. You know, again, there's a test. You take the course, and then you take the test from this third party, and if you successfully pass the test, Excelsior says, okay, we will award you 3 semester-hour credits for this knowledge, which kind of goes back to the whole competency-based aspect of higher education that we seem to be going towards these days. So those are 3 things that I see. But I also agree with Craig, and I think I started this way, is that it's like an 800 number. You got to pay for it somehow. Maybe it's free to somebody, but somewhere along the line, the money is it's got to come.
You know, first, before I comment about the future, let me just say it's been nice to have a discussion that is not only about the future, that's also about the past. There's a lot of history here that people tend to forget, ignore, or not just be aware of at all. You know, we read endless articles in the Washington Post, New York Times, Chronicle of Higher Ed, The Guardian, Wired Magazine, eCampus News, Chief Learning Officer, wherever. And it all seems like if you aren't aware of what happened this week, you're not part of the conversation. And that's unfortunate, because there's a rich history here. I went to University of Wisconsin, and that's where a lot of it started, Penn State, Wisconsin, and other places around the country. were hotbeds of distance learning, and much happened in the 50s. People thought Charles Wiedemeyer was the crazy guy doing satellite TV. I never met the guy, but he changed my life. And Glenn Jones, Craig mentioned Jones International U. Glenn Jones is a friend of mine and sponsored my research in the 90s on e-learning and in corporate and in higher ed, and they were a big player in the space, the first ones accredited, as Craig was saying. So there's a lot of people out there that have paved the way for us to get to where we are today. And so and MOOCs are not necessarily a new phenomenon. Offering them online are, but we were doing, in effect, this via TV and correspondence in the past in some way. And I wrote a little piece earlier this year, have some MOOC with your TV dinner. You can look that up and watch that. So let me give you 5 or 6 things. I mean, in the near term, we're going to look at the types of MOOCs and professional development MOOCs for teacher training, for doctor training, healthcare professions, for leadership training. I think PD MOOCs are the way to go. These entrepreneurship classes are PD MOOCs, professional development MOOCs. I think my eye doctor, my dentist, my my general practitioner doctor are going to get some content via MOOCs. Not all, of course, but so I think bottleneck MOOCs. If Obama's serious about STEM fields, there are certain courses that people drop out of before they can get into engineering programs. The early math courses. If we can offer MOOCs where in the summer you could take that math, that difficult calculus course or whatever it is, till you got the content and you can get into the engineering program, then we might increase the number of people majoring in science, math, engineering, and technology fields by figuring out what are the most difficult intro courses that could be taught via a MOOC Lite platform or a blended kind of thing. So I think that's one area, is bottleneck. I think professional development. I think advanced placement courses for high school kids, and I think competency kinds of things, just-in-time skills, shop floor, some training that they need just in time. That makes a lot of sense. I've some types of MOOCs. Some of them make more sense than others. Marketing products make some sense as well, as Kevin was saying. I do think that today, most programs today, at least I see here at Indiana U, will say we'll let you take one class online in your face-to-face doctoral program. I think in the future we're going to see them say we'll let you take one class as a MOOC in your program, whether it's an undergraduate, master's, or doctorate, or some other certificate program, and that one course will see people say, oh, maybe MOOCs aren't as low a quality now as they were 5 years ago, or whatever, and it'll open things up. I think Jeb Bush is part of this MOOC to Degrees program where they have a lost leader of the first course. The Western Governors University Texas or Western Governors University Indiana, or in general, have outcomes-based education. I think we'll see MOOCs turn the tide in terms of people thinking about outcomes-based education. I think at the University of Wisconsin, again, has been a leader in flexible degrees, giving people credit for what they know and having them focus on what they don't know in future classes and not having to repeat what they do know. I think MOOCs will be part of that effort to opening things up. So I think flexibility, outcomes-based, and then finally, I think 2 last things. I think our resumes will change. If you look at most higher ed resumes, and Craig harkened back to working at Nebraska Kearney. I mean, I'm sure your faculty have resumes thousands of pages long, yet their education space is like 3 lines. Their bachelor's degree, their master's, and their PhD. I think in the future we're going to have formal degree stuff at the top. We're going to have credentialed, whether it's MOOC or other, in the middle, badges and credential certificates. And then at the bottom we might have explorations that we had that may or may not be some kind of test around it, like MIT objectively, or Stanford engineering program and so forth. I think our education space will be 3-tiered. The lowest tier will be our explorations of online courses and open educational resources, but I think we underplay it. I think we underplay our competencies, our education, and there's going to be people coming into that space to credential it or certify it or give us some kind of recognition for it. And finally, I think on TV, going back to TV, I think we're going to have the MOOC channel. We're going to not just have one MOOC channel, we're going to have hundreds of them. You want to learn about history of the MOOC, we're going to have interactive TV, I think, of some kind. Maybe not TV, but there'll be channels, whether it's on the web, a MOOC channel on the web, or a MOOC channel on TV. But we will capture this content like Blackboard's doing. And I'm not just saying I'm going to bed with Blackboard here. I'm just happen to have done one with them. I'm not saying that's the best format. We don't know what the best format is. We're still exploring. I think I should probably end there and just say thanks for offering us an opportunity to look back and look to the future.
Yeah, and thanks for the great discussion. I really appreciate it. There was some really, so much discussed in a relatively short period of time. So thanks to our panelists, Kevin Currie, Director at Northeastern University Online, Kurt Bonk, Professor at Indiana University, and Craig Weiss, founder of eLearning 24/7. For more of the latest stories, white papers, videos, and podcasts on online education for colleges and universities, you can visit corporatelearningnetwork.com. And be sure to check out the event overview for the conference I mentioned at the beginning, Effective Marketing for Online Education, which will be held December 9th through 12th in San Diego. Thanks for watching, everyone.